friends, and welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'm really glad you're here. If you're new here, my name is Becca. This channel is all about my love for spinning, knitting, weaving, crocheting, sewing, all the fiber things. I invite you to grab whatever project you have on the go and join me. Let's make some stuff. Today I want to talk about color. I love colors, all colors in my knitting. They make me so happy in my spinning, but I will admit it's not my strong suit when it comes to mixing and blending colors. I don't know color theory. I rely on other people who do have more of a handle on that. I have tried my hand at dyeing yarn and fiber, and I think I ended up with happy accidents. I loved how they turned out, but I would definitely say that I am a beginner when it comes to dyeing yarn and fiber. But I do purchase a lot of yarn and fiber that has been hand dyed, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about how those behave differently when the fiber has been dyed and you spin it into yarn and then knit with it, versus if the yarn has already been spun and then dyed and then you knit with it. And so I have several examples, both of yarn but also finished garments, to share with you that have been hand dyed in different ways, so that you can see how they turn out. So we'll start with what I'm wearing. This sweater was hand dyed fiber, not dyed by me. This fiber was dyed by Shirsty Cat, and as always I'll put links to various shops in the description if you're interested. But this is fiber that I purchased to spin specifically for a sweater. So I bought a large quantity of fiber in two different colors, actually, that I thought corresponded really nicely. One had a little more gray and was a little lighter, and one was a little bit darker and had some blacks in addition to the plum. And so the way that I spun this yarn was to spin each of those fibers separately and then ply one from each of those different colors together. You can see that the color shifts in a bit of a random way, but it overall I feel like has harmony in the color. It definitely feels like a one color garment, even though there's a lot of different shades. So fiber that is dyed can be very subtle or very dramatic in the different shades that exist. This braid, this skein of yarn, was hand dyed fiber by Serenity Dye Works. This is from their Yarn School Dropouts line. And you can see the yellows and peaches in there. I think it's going to be really beautiful, especially if I pair it with a solid color neutral. But this was dyed in the fiber, and then I spun it up. There are a lot of technical aspects that you can get into with when you're doing spinning from hand-dyed fiber, how you can divide the fiber up to get a gradient or a fractal, or many different ways to combine the fiber. Sometimes people will separate the different colors and spin them separately so that they have a lot of control. That's not how I do my crafting typically. I like the sort of random and somewhat organic way that the colors come together. And so I try to buy fiber that's been dyed with colors that I find harmonious. And I think go together, because when you spin the way that I spin, you end up with some marling, or sometimes they call it candy striping, where you have, or barber poling, where you have two very different colors that are twisted together in the same section of the yarn. So for example, I'm not sure you can see this, but I will show these up close so that you can see them as well. In this section right here, there's a yellow and a salmon twisted together. But this, how subtle or striking that is depends a lot on the colors that are used. So for example, this skein of yarn was hand-dyed fiber that was a little more subtle, so it's pinks and purples, so there's plenty of barber pulling happening in this, but the overall effect is that you have sort of a plum colored, and when you look at something from a distance, it looks very different than what it looks like when you're up close. And then to something even more subtle, if you buy fiber that is more of a gradient or tonal dye, the shifts are going to be much more subtle than if you have something that is sort of contrasting colors. And all that to say that sometimes you can buy a fiber. I'll tell a story about how I bought this fiber that I absolutely loved the dyes, and I loved the dyer. The color blend together was just beautiful in the fiber. And then I spun it into yarn, and I wasn't super pleased with how the yarn turned out. I then knitted it up into what I was going to knit. I was making some felted slippers. So I knitted up the slippers, and I thought, this is atrocious. I hated it so much. And then I felted it, and then I loved it again. So it just shows you how throughout the process, things can change. The way things look may change how you feel about it. So here's another example of a garment that I have made. This was yarn fiber that I had dyed in these yellows and oranges, and then spun up into this super fine lace weight yarn and knitted into this shawl. And the construction of the shawl meant that I ended up with these structural stripes in the finished garment that I just thought was really beautiful. But again, I didn't control any of this. I found colors that I thought looked nice together, and it just sort of worked out this way. So this is not to say that it always turns out this way. I have an example of a project that I'm still trying to figure out. This yarn was 2 different colors of fiber. There was lime green and grape jelly, the purple, and I loved the 2 different colors. I put them next to each other at the yarn shop. They even let me take them into the sun to see what they would look like together, and I thought, this is going to be fantastic. They asked me if I was making a Halloween project. I said no. I just liked the colors. And then I spun them up. I spun them up very similar to how I spun the sweater. I spun 1 ply with the lime green and 1 ply with the grape jelly, and then I plied the 2 together. And so it is all the way through this barber pole striping. I don't hate the yarn, although the grape jelly does look more brown next to the green in this than it did in the fiber itself. But I thought, well, I've had that experience where I didn't like the yarn, but I sort of liked it knitted, but not really. So I thought I would knit some up. This is just a garter stitch sample, and I'm still not super pleased with it. I don't know what this yarn wants to be. I don't hate it, but it's not really speaking to me yet of what it wants to be. It's a very nice wool. I like the springiness of it, but still something in my thought pile. So that was hand-dyed fiber turned into yarn and knitting. What about hand-dyed yarn? How does that behave differently? Well, I have some examples of garments that I have knitted with hand-dyed yarn. So the fiber was spun in its natural state, white usually, and then once the finished yarn was done, the yarn was hand painted or hand dyed and I purchased it that way. Or in the case of these socks, I actually did the dyeing of the yarn itself. So you can see this is a very dramatic with bright yellows and greens. Again, happy accidents. I didn't really plan how this was going to work out. I think they're great for socks. I wouldn't wear a sweater that had these colors, probably, although I might. Anyway, these socks were dyed, hand painted. My sister and I had a lovely dyeing session one day, and I dyed this, hand painted this yarn. You can see that when you work with yarn that has been dyed, there's much more color separation. Depending on the sections, the lengths of the hand dyed sections, you'll have pooling or striping. Self-striping yarn can also be hand dyed, but the lengths of the yarn that are dyed the same color are much, much longer than usually in hand painted. So this is one example of a hand dyed yarn. Here's another in sort of more subtle shades, but you can still see the pooling of the colors, the sort of how the pooling changes depending on how many stitches go around. On these socks, I did not dye this. This was a purchased hand-painted yarn. As was this sweater that you might have seen. This is hand-painted yarn that I bought from a shop in Montreal. But you can still see the pooling of the yarn. This was knit in the round, and so you can see the bottom of the pooling sort of looks very similar, and then it was split at the top, changed the number of stitches, and so the pooling changed a little bit. But the same sort of effect is going on, where the color separation is fairly strong, and you get more of an overall mottled look than you do with fiber that was dyed. And that leads me to a new project that I'm working on. The new project that I'm working on is going to be using this yarn. This is yarn that my sister and I dyed together, hand painted. It was bare merino wool and lace weight from Knit Picks. So it was white when I got it. And I'll just unfurl the skein so that you can see what it looks like and how the painting was done. So you can see the stripes. It was probably laying like this. And the dye was then done in sections across. There is some overlap at the barriers, so there's no white left in this. But it's shades of blue and turquoise and plum purple. And this is what it looked like in the skein in the yarn. You might be wondering what that looks like in the ball. Here's the ball. So the skein and the ball. You can see the colors sort of shifting through there. It's really hard to tell how long in a ball of yarn the color sections are, whether it's going to look like self-striping versus more of a pooling color. So often if you're buying yarn that is hand painted, they may have a sample of knitted, but you should definitely knit a sample or knit a swatch before you go into the process of making your whole garment, so that you know how the color is going to behave. So I have done that for my project. I have knitted a swatch, and here you can see there's a little bit of color gradient pooling. Because the colors are close to each other, it's sort of very subtle, but there is quite a bit of color variation. Because it was hand-painted yarn, the colors are very separate, so the purple sections and the turquoise sections are nice and separated. And this swatch This swatch is for a new shawl that I am casting on. You may remember this book from a previous project. This is the Gossamer Webs collection from Galina Kimleva. I'm making the diamond triangular shawl, so it's a triangle shawl with a diamond pattern, geometric pattern in the center. And the way this works, you cast on one edge and then pick up stitches all the way across, knit the body, and then you're going to cast on the top border and graft that along the top. The way these shawls are designed is very ingenious. If you're doing a square, you start at one edge, knit that border, pick up those stitches, knit the side borders while you're knitting the body, and then you come to the final corner, turn the corner, knit and pick up across so that when you're finished, all the borders are all done at the same time as the garment. So you don't have to pick up a bunch of stitches and knit into them afterwards. It's just a really amazing technique, and it turns out really lovely. So I think this is going to be beautiful. I have started the first cast on edge. A little bit more complicated than the sample, but I've cast on my 7 stitches. I'm starting up the side of the shawl, and then once we finish all the length of that border, turn it this way, pick up into these stitches here, all the way across, and then work the body from there. So let's go and do some knitting. hope you've enjoyed this look at how color works in hand-dyed fiber versus hand-dyed yarn. Thank you so much for spending some of your creative time with me. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!